I need to check the used names list and then write the story. The band names are Graham, Christine, Margaret, Helen, Vivian, Daniel, Robin, Fiona, Pauline, Connor, Spencer, Nadine, Ryan, Bex, Leanne, Marcus, Trish, Lorraine, Callum, Philip, Stuart, Diane, Barry, Steph, Wendy, Trevor. Now I'll write the story. Male narrator, 60 plus, New Zealand setting, to 6,000 words. First person, relationship-based addressing. New character names. She posted a video of me on Facebook with the caption, "When your partner thinks retirement is a personality." When I asked her to take it down, she said, "Oh, relax. It's just a laugh." I drove to my daughter's place that night and didn't look back. 3 days later, she'd left 41 voicemails begging me to tell people it was staged. I want to be honest about something before I get into any of this. I'm 63 years old. I spent 31 years with the New Zealand Fire Service, most of it out of the Tauranga station, the last 8 as a senior crew leader. I've walked into burning buildings more times than I can count. I've carried people out. I've also carried people who didn't make it. And that weight doesn't leave you. Not ever. Not completely. So when I say what happened to me last year shook me in a way I didn't expect, I need you to understand that I'm not someone who rattles easily. My name's not important for this story, but the people in it are. So let me tell you about them properly. My partner, I'll call her by what she was to me. My partner. Because that's what she said she was. Her name was Cecily, 44 years old. Ran a small event styling business out of Hamilton. We'd been together 2 years and a few months. Met through mutual friends at a birthday dinner down in Rotorua, and I thought she was sharp and funny and had this energy about her that made a room feel more alive. I wasn't wrong about that, exactly. But energy isn't always the same thing as warmth. My daughter Judith lives in Papamoa with her husband and my 2 grandchildren. She's 34, and she's got more sense than most people twice her age. My son, Neil, is 31 and works in Auckland in construction project management. Good lad. Both of them are. Their mum, my ex-wife, and I separated amicably when they were teenagers, and we've stayed on decent terms ever since. The kids grew up knowing their dad had a hard job and that sometimes he brought bits of it home without meaning to. The incident that matters to this story started almost 18 months before the Facebook video. I was still working at the time. I'd pushed my retirement date back twice because honestly I didn't know what I'd do with myself without the job. One Friday evening in autumn, we responded to a house fire in a residential street just outside the CBD. The neighbors had already called it in and were standing in their driveways when we arrived. The fire had taken hold of the back half of the house fast. The kind of dry timber construction that goes up like it's been waiting for permission. We got the family out, a couple in their 50s, and their adult son who'd been visiting. But there was a dog inside. A big old lab. And the son was losing his mind on the front lawn, saying the dog was somewhere in the hallway. My crew leader instincts and my actual instincts went in 2 different directions for about half a second. Then, I went in. I found the dog cowering under a hallway table. Got him out. Myself too. Though the ceiling came down about 4 seconds after I cleared the door, and a burning beam caught me across the left shoulder and the side of my neck. 2nd-degree burns. I spent 4 days in Tauranga Hospital and came back to work on light duties for 6 weeks after that. Physically, I healed fine. The burns scarred a bit. I've got a patch on my neck that's still slightly discolored if you know to look for it. But the other thing that came home with me from that fire was harder to name at first. I started waking at 3 in the morning with my heart going like I was still in that hallway. Loud, sudden noises, a car backfiring, something dropping in the kitchen, even the smoke alarm going off when I burned toast would send me somewhere I didn't want to be for a few minutes. My GP referred me to a specialist, and the word that came back was PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. At 62 years old, after 31 years of the job, my nervous system had finally said enough. I want to say this clearly. I wasn't ashamed of the diagnosis. I'd seen enough of my colleagues over the years struggle quietly with the same thing, some of them in ways that cost them everything, to know that shame was the wrong response. I started seeing a psychologist in Tauranga, a good one, a woman I'll call my therapist because that's what she was. I went every fortnight. I did the work. I retired properly 6 months after the fire because continuing didn't make sense anymore, and I gave myself permission to actually rest. Cecily knew all of this. I told her about the fire, about the hospital, about the diagnosis. She'd seemed supportive early on. She'd driven down from Hamilton to see me in hospital. She'd brought food when I first got home. She'd sat with me on the back deck and let me talk through some of it. I thought she understood. I thought she was in it with me. But as the months went on, I started to notice things. A particular kind of sigh when I declined an invitation because the venue was too loud or too smoky. A look that passed across her face, just briefly, just quickly enough that she could pretend it hadn't happened, when I needed to step outside at a restaurant for a few minutes to settle myself. Comments like, "You seem a lot better lately. Maybe you're past the worst of it," said in a tone that was really a question, disguised as a statement. Once, after I had to pull over on the way to an event in Tauranga because I caught a smell from a roadside burn-off that hit me harder than I expected, she said from the passenger seat, "How long do you think this is going to go on for?" Like it was an inconvenience. Like it had an expiry date I was ignoring out of stubbornness. I told my therapist about the comments. She asked me how they made me feel. I said tired, mostly. Like I was managing two things at once. My own recovery, and also someone else's impatience with it. My therapist said that was worth paying attention to. Last September, Cecily came down to Tauranga for a long weekend. My daughter Judith and her family were coming for Sunday lunch. So Saturday was just the two of us, a walk along the waterfront in the morning, a quiet afternoon at home. That evening we were watching something on television, one of those drama series she liked. I won't say which one, but there was a scene midway through the episode involving a building fire. Footage of actual flames, the sound of them, and people screaming in the background. I felt it start before I could stop it. The tightening in my chest, the coldness that comes up through my hands, the way the room suddenly feels very far away and very close at the same time. I've gotten better at managing them. My therapist has taught me grounding techniques, and most of the time they work. But sometimes they don't. And this was one of those times. "I need to pause this for a bit," I said. I kept my voice steady. That's one of the things I've learned to do. Cecily picked up the remote and paused it. But she didn't say anything. She sat back, and I could feel the particular quality of her silence. I got up and stood by the window, focused on the streetlight outside, counted my breaths. It was working, slowly. Then I noticed the light from her phone screen reflecting off the window glass. I turned around. She was filming me, not discreetly. She had the phone up at a slight angle, pointed across the room at where I was standing, and I could see from the red dot in the corner that she was live. She was live on Facebook. "What are you doing?" I asked. "Just capturing a moment," she said with a little laugh. "You look very dramatic standing there. Turn it off." "Oh, come on." My friends think it's sweet. They can see the comments. I walked toward her, and I could see her screen properly then. The caption she'd put on the live stream read, "When your partner thinks retirement is a personality." There were laughing emojis in the comments, little yellow faces finding me funny. I stood there for a moment, and I felt something I can only describe as a very clean kind of clarity. Not anger, exactly. Not yet. Just the sudden knowledge of what I was looking at. "Cecily," I said, and my voice was much quieter than I expected it to be. Turn the phone off and end the stream. Don't be so sensitive. It's just a bit of fun. They love you. They don't know me. Turn it off. She sighed that sigh I'd heard so many times and made a show of ending the stream. But she was still half smiling, like the whole thing was an overreaction on my part, and she was being very patient about it. I went to the bathroom and ran cold water over my wrists for a minute or two. The panic had passed. What was left was something else. I looked at myself in the mirror, and I thought about what my therapist had said in our last session, about the difference between relationships that support your recovery and ones that quietly undermine it. She hadn't named Cecily specifically. She hadn't needed to. I dried my hands. I went back to the lounge, picked up my keys and my wallet from the kitchen counter, and put my jacket on. "Where are you going?" Cecily asked. She'd put the television back on. "To Judith's," I said. "It's 9:30 at night." "I know. You're being ridiculous." I already ended the stream. I stopped at the door. "What you did tonight, filming me during a panic attack and broadcasting it to your friends with a caption making fun of me, that's not something I'm going to pretend is fine. We're done, Cecily." She started talking, but I closed the door behind me and I didn't go back. I drove to Judith's. She came to the door in her dressing gown and took one look at my face and said, "Come in, Dad. I'll put the kettle on." She didn't ask me what had happened until I was ready to tell her, and when I did tell her, she sat very still across the kitchen table and let me get through the whole of it before she said anything. Then she said, "Dad, you have to know that none of that is okay." "I know," I said. "Good," she said. "Stay in the spare room tonight." I did. In the morning I had 37 missed calls from Cecily, and a string of text messages that went from apologetic to confused to accusatory over the course of about 6 hours. I read through them without responding. Neil rang mid-morning, Judith had told him, which was fine. That's what siblings do. And he was quiet for a moment after I confirmed what had happened. And then he said, "Right, good that you left," in the same tone he uses when a problem on a building site has been correctly identified and dealt with. That's very Neil. I appreciated it. I drove home that afternoon to change and check the house. I changed the code on my front door. Cecily had it from a time she'd stayed, and I'd needed her to let a plumber in. I gathered up the few things she'd left at my place over the months. A cardigan, a book, some face cream, a pair of earrings from the bathroom shelf. Put them in a box. At around 2 in the afternoon, my phone rang, and it was Cecily's friend. I'll call her my partner's friend, because that's how I knew her, though I'd only met her 3 or 4 times. She came at me immediately, said Cecily was devastated, said I'd completely overreacted to a harmless joke, and then she says you did something to get back at her. What did you do? I told her I'd ended the relationship and gone home. That was it. There was a pause on the other end of the line. Then she said, "Her Facebook is getting absolutely hammered. She's getting horrible comments." I told her I hadn't gone near Cecily's Facebook. I hadn't been on Facebook at all. Another pause. Then, more quietly, "Wait. So you didn't say anything to anyone?" "No." "Oh," she said. "Right." After I hung up, I rang my mate Bruce. We go back 20-odd years. Met through the fire service, though he retired before I did. Now he's out in the Bay of Plenty doing a bit of fishing and a lot of woodworking. I told him the short version. He was quiet for a moment, and then he said, "People saw the stream. Then. Apparently. And they recognized you? I don't know, maybe. Bruce said he'd have a look and call me back." He rang back 40 minutes later. "Mate," he said, "someone who knows you from your fire service days shared the stream and tagged it with some context. The news article from when you went back in for the dog. There's a thread going on her page. I didn't go and look at it myself. I had no interest in watching it unfold. What I did do, once Bruce had told me roughly what was happening, was make a brief post on my own Facebook, which I use mostly to keep up with my grandchildren, and occasionally post photos of the garden, asking people not to direct any harassment towards Cecily. I said I appreciated that people were upset on my behalf, but that pile-ons helped nobody, and I wanted no part of one. I meant it. Whatever she'd done, I don't believe in that kind of thing. The doorbell rang at about 4 that afternoon. I checked the peephole. Cecily, still in the same clothes from the night before. Mascara all round her eyes. I spoke to her through the door. "Your things are in a box outside the door," I said. "You should take them. Please let me in." "I need to explain." "There's nothing to explain, Cecily. What you did was clear enough. People are saying terrible things to me online. You have to tell them it was a joke. I already posted asking people not to harass you. That's not enough. Tell them I didn't do anything wrong." I thought about that for a moment. "I won't lie for you," I said. "You did do something wrong. That's why I left." She was crying now. I could hear it. Part of me felt sorry for her, in the way you'd feel sorry for anyone in distress. But that's different from going back. Those are two separate things. "Please," she said. "Tell them it was staged. Tell them you knew I was filming. My business is going to suffer. Goodbye, Cecily." I stepped back from the door and sat down in the kitchen and waited. I heard her on the doorstep for a while. Eventually, I heard her take the box. Then I heard her car start and drive away. About a week after all of this, something I hadn't expected happened. I got a text from Cecily's flatmate she'd taken on a flatmate about 6 months into our relationship. A woman in her late 20s who worked in healthcare. I'll call her the flatmate, because that's what she was to me. The text said simply, "I'd like to talk to you if that's okay. I have some things I think you should know." We met for coffee in Hamilton. Halfway between us. She was nervous, kept turning her cup around on the saucer. She said she'd been wanting to say something for months. "She didn't take your situation seriously," she said. I mean, she never took it seriously. Even from early on. She'd talk about your panic attacks, like they were something you were putting on. She'd do an impression of you sometimes, when she thought it was funny. I looked at her across the table. "I should have said something sooner," she said. "I know that. But she's my landlord, and I needed the room, and I told myself it wasn't my business. The night of the stream, after you left, I confronted her about it. I told her what she'd done was cruel." She laughed. She actually laughed and said, "You'd be fine by morning." "Why tell me now?" I asked. "Because she started telling people a different version. That you were difficult and erratic, and that she was documenting it for her own safety. She's rewriting it." I went cold. I've worked long enough with people to know that a false narrative, if it gets enough of a head start, can do real damage. I have a good reputation in this town. I've spent 31 years building it. The flatmate opened her phone and showed me their text thread. There were messages from weeks before the incident where Cecily had explicitly talked about waiting for me to have another attack so she could film it. There was a message the morning after where the flatmate had challenged her, and Cecily had said, roughly, that I needed to develop a sense of humor about myself. "Would you be willing to keep those?" I asked. "In case they're needed? I already sent copies to myself," she said. "I'm not going to let her rewrite this." She was risking an awkward living situation by talking to me. I told her I was grateful. She shook her head like it was nothing. But it was something. The weeks that followed were unsettled in small ways. Cecily posted some vague things on her social media, nothing naming me directly, but obvious enough to anyone who knew the situation, hinting at a partner who'd been emotionally volatile and who she'd been walking on eggshells around. The flatmate, true to her word, shared portions of their text thread with a couple of mutual connections. which was enough to stop that version of the story gaining any traction. The event styling business took a hit. A few people who'd been following Cecily's business account unfollowed after the stream. I can't say I was sorry, but I also hadn't tried to make it happen. These things move on their own. About 3 weeks after we'd split, I got a call from an unknown number. It turned out to be her older sister, ringing to apologize on behalf of the family. I hadn't known the sister well. We'd met twice, briefly. She said she'd seen the stream, and she was mortified. She said Cecily hadn't always been like this, that the fixation on social media performance had taken hold of her gradually over the past few years, and that the family had been worried about it. She never told us you had PTSD, the sister said. Not properly. I don't think she understood what that actually meant. She understood enough, I said. But I said it gently, because the sister wasn't at fault. I'm sorry she treated you that way, she said. What you did? Going back in that fire for that dog? My kids saw the story about it. You're a good man. I didn't know what to say to that. I thanked her, and we hung up, and I sat on the back deck for a while, and looked at the garden and felt something settle. Not completely, but a little. My therapist, when I told her all of this at our next appointment, said something I've thought about a lot since. She said the body keeps score. Yes, and that PTSD is real and serious and deserves proper care, but she also said something about relationships. She said that recovery from trauma requires a particular kind of environment, one where you can be seen clearly without being diminished. She said what Cecily had been providing wasn't support. It was the performance of support, which is a different thing entirely, and which can actually slow healing down because you spend energy managing the performer's feelings instead of your own. I thought about all those moments, every sigh, every loaded silence, every, how long do you think this is going to go on for? And I understood what she meant. I haven't heard from Cecily directly since the doorstep conversation. The flatmate texted me a couple of months later to let me know she'd found a new place to live and was out. I wished her well. Bruce and I have been going fishing every couple of weeks out near Hiwa, good for the head. Sea air. Not much need to talk. My grandchildren come most Sundays for lunch. And the little one, who's 5, has decided that helping Granddad in the garden is her current favorite thing, and I'm not about to argue with that. The PTSD is still there. It probably always will be, in some form. But it's quieter than it was, and I'm not carrying it alone anymore in the way I was when I was also carrying someone else's impatience with it. There's a difference. I want to say something to anyone who reads this and recognizes themselves in it, not necessarily in the specifics, but in the shape of it. The person who made you feel like your injury, your grief, your recovery, your very human need for time and care was an inconvenience to their schedule. PTSD doesn't arrive on a timetable. Neither does recovery from any kind of trauma, physical, emotional, or otherwise. A partner who truly loves you will sit with the uncertainty of that. They will not film it and put it on Facebook for laughs. They will not sigh at you across a restaurant. They will not ask how long it's going to go on for, because they understand that that's the wrong question entirely. You are not too much. You are not dramatic. You are not an inconvenience, or a prop, or a punchline. And you are allowed to walk out of a situation that treats you like one. I did. At 63 years old, after 31 years of a hard job, and one genuinely good marriage, and one relationship that looked right but wasn't, I picked up my keys and my wallet, and I walked out. No revenge, no campaign, no attempt to manage the fallout. I removed myself from a situation that was making me smaller, and I let the rest sort itself out. Sometimes that's all it takes. Sometimes walking away is the whole answer. My therapist would say and has said that the most important thing you can do when someone shows you who they are is to believe them. Not the version of them they present when things are easy. Not the version they'd like you to remember. The version that shows up when you're standing at the window trying to breathe through a panic attack and they reach for their phone. That's who they are. Believe them. I've thought a lot about cause and effect since all of this happened. Not in any mystical sense, I'm too old and too practical for that, but in the plain, observable way that actions move through the world and eventually circle back to the person who started them. Cecily put a live stream on Facebook. She made a choice. Everything that followed was the natural consequence of that choice. Not something I engineered, not something I wished into existence. She handed the world a window into who she was, and the world looked through it. That's not revenge. That's just how things work. What I've come to understand. At 63, after 31 years of a job that showed me exactly how fragile human life is and how quickly everything can change, what I've come to understand is that character isn't what people show you when things are easy. It's what they reach for when you're at your lowest. Cecily reached for her phone. She reached for an audience. She reached for a caption that would get laughs at the expense of a man standing at a window trying to remember how to breathe. That told me everything I needed to know about who she was at her core. And the hard truth is that she'd been showing me smaller versions of that truth for months. The sighs, the loaded silences, the how long is this going to go on for? I just hadn't wanted to see it clearly. There's a kind of courage, I think, in being willing to look at something clearly, even when it's inconvenient. My therapist would call it wisdom. I'd call it something you earn slowly, usually through making the mistake of not doing it often enough earlier in your life. I'm not proud of how long I tolerated Cecily's impatience with my recovery. I told myself it wasn't that bad, that she was otherwise good company, that everyone has their rough edges, but there's a difference between rough edges and a fundamental absence of empathy. And I was choosing not to see it. The night I drove to Judith's, something shifted in me that I don't think will shift back. Not because of what Cecily did, exactly, but because of what I did next. I picked up my keys. I made a decision. After months of managing my own recovery, while quietly absorbing someone else's irritation with it, I finally stopped absorbing and started moving. That's not a small thing. For someone working through PTSD, whose nervous system is already working overtime just to get through an ordinary day, it takes a particular kind of resolve to say, "This is not acceptable, and I am leaving." Moral courage doesn't always look dramatic. Sometimes it looks like a 63-year-old man closing a door quietly behind him and driving across town to his daughter's house. Sometimes it's that small, and that ordinary, and that necessary. What happened to Cecily afterward, the comments, the professional fallout, the flatmate finally speaking her truth, I played no part in any of it. I asked people not to harass her, and I meant it. But I also won't pretend the outcome was unjust. When you treat someone's trauma as content, you've made a choice about what kind of person you're going to be. The world has a way of reflecting that back. If you're carrying something heavy right now, a diagnosis, a loss, a recovery that's taking longer than the people around you would like, please hear this from someone who's been in it. You are not obligated to shrink yourself to fit someone else's comfort level. You are not dramatic. You are not a burden. And you are absolutely allowed to remove yourself from any relationship, any room, any situation that treats your healing like an inconvenience. Walk out if you have to. Drive to your daughter's. Sit in a kitchen and drink tea and tell someone the truth. The rest has a way of sorting itself out.